In this video, we're going to talk about the GetPivotData function, which allows us to return information from a pivot table. Before we do, I want to talk about creating pivot tables and expand or emphasize the information that you've hopefully already seen in the previous two videos. I think one was from Leela Yarni and the other one, My Online Training Hub. And so if we want to create, this is already a table, they've emphasized that. It's kind of nice to be able to create them from a table. So if data gets added to the table, the pivot table will automatically reflect that data. I'm going to go to Insert. Now we have two buttons, Recommended Pivot Tables and Pivot Tables. So just to click on this, it's looking at the data and go, well, these are the things you might be interested in. Sum of the salary by state or bonus by state. Maybe we want to count the IDs, these IDs by department. How many people do we have in each department? Sum of hires by year. So a lot of times you can start with one of these recommended ones. Very often I tend to go with a blank pivot table. If you do that, it puts it on a new sheet automatically without asking the question. I'm going to go ahead and delete. More often than not, I just tend to go Insert Pivot Table because then it brings up this, says, well, what's your data? It's my empty table. I have the choice of putting it in an existing sheet or a new worksheet. I'm going to go ahead and put it in a new worksheet. So you end up with this, your pivot table field. I did kind of like the suggestion of moving the field area over here. The other thing I want to mention is if you ever click out of your pivot table, like I just did, that field list will go away. So if you click back into it, it should come back, but if it doesn't, on your Analyze ribbon, here is that field list. So occasionally I'll get students who can't find their field list, and it's right here on that button. And it goes away if you ever just click off this pivot table area. The next thing I want to emphasize is this thing about dates. So I'm going to drag the date to the row area. I just click and drag it, move it to rows. And notice it automatically adds years, quarters to this, and so that is the grouping that they've talked about. If you go to Pivot Table Analyze, right here is this group selection. If I click on that, it opens up this box, and then I can say, you know what, I don't care about quarters. I just want to know maybe how many people we've hired and the salary of those people in a year and a month. So when I hit OK on this, now I have years and months. I could also group just on months, but that gets a little weird in that this would be all the people we've hired in January, independent of the year. So be careful how you look at that. It probably makes more sense to say I'm interested in years and months. Maybe you care about years and quarters. Maybe you're on a quarterly system and you want to check the number of hires by quarter. Anyway, the point is, up here is where you can group or ungroup. And if you ungroup, it just goes back to each individual date that's in your data. So let's go ahead and group it to years and months. I had it there, hit OK. The next thing I want to emphasize, anytime you take a column that has numeric values, so in other words, base salary, bonus, commission, all of these columns have numeric values. When you move it over to your pivot table, let's just do base salary, it's automatically going to do a sum of the base salary. The next thing we saw where you can format this right here, but let me show you a couple other places. Pivot Table Analyze, there's this thing called Field Settings. So wherever you're selected, when you click Field Settings, it's information about that field. It's in this box that I can change it from sum to average maybe of the salary. And right here, I can give it a custom name. So I could just say average of salary or whatever you want. You can also do that by clicking in the cell and then just typing up in the formula bar. The other point I want to mention on field settings is right here, you could also change the number format to say currency, 2 decimals or 0 decimals, hit OK. OK. So right click is kind of an easy way of doing that, but also field settings. And one more, wait, there's more. Sum of base salary right here is field settings. So there's several places to get to that. The other thing I wanted to point out that's kind of cool though, is if you take any field that has text in it, like this ID is text because it has a dash and an E in front of it, well, then the system will automatically do a count on that. So let's take this ID field. I could take the last name or anything and move it down to values. It will automatically be a count of the ID. So basically, what are we looking at? I have the hire date in the rows, and then I'm counting the number of IDs. So basically, this is how many people did we hire in 2012, how many did we hire in 2013, 14, etc. And then how many did we hire each of those months? And what is the sum of the salary for those people that we hired in those months? Some other things to play with under pivot table design is this idea of subtotals. So right here, this is a subtotal, right? It's totaling all the people we hired in 2012. You may not want to see that. In this case, I think I do. And you want them at the top of the group or at the bottom. If you put it at the bottom, it repeats the 2012 and then sticks your answer down here. So this is the sum of the salary for the people hired in 2012 and the total number of people that we've hired. If you want it at the top, it looks like that. The other one is, I think they pointed out, was we have an outline form, which puts your information in 2 columns, versus the compact form puts it in 1 column with an indent. And then there's a tabular form. What's the difference there? Oh, it puts this all in 1 row, and then the subtotal automatically goes at the bottom. And the last thing I'll mention before we talk about the GetPivotData function is how easy it is to just play with pivot tables and see what happens. So in other words, maybe I'm interested in the state, and I'm going to put that, or let's just do the office. I'll change and do the office. So now I have that as a filter. So I want to see how many people we've hired in Boston each of those years, so that I can filter the information there. Or I may decide I want the office to be part of a row. I'm going to put it above the years. And so now basically I have Boston, all of our hires. And if I scroll down far enough, I'll get Chicago and all of our hires. And then Dallas by year, by month. Maybe I don't want the months anymore. So I can take this field, go to the design, the group selection, and go, you know, let's just, all I want is to know how many people did we hire in each year for each office. If you don't want to field someplace, or for instance, I am going to take office out of here, you can just click and move it over to this area, or you can just unselect it, click it, unclick it, and it'll take it away. I am going to put months back in, so I'll go to my group selection and add months. So I have it looking like this, and notice I have a 2012 total. Let's talk about GetPivotData. So here's an example. Very often I've added a lot of information to a pivot table, but I'm creating a sheet that has a report on it, and that sheet just needs to see the number of hires in 2012. Now I could easily do a sum if here, where I would just sum the, or count if basically. I would count the ID based on the hire year. That would be one way to get this information. The other way we can do it is with this GetPivotData. I already have this nice pivot table. For now, I'm just going to, I will duplicate these years over here just to demonstrate. Control copy. Let's just put them over here. So here's how the GetPivotData works. Is you simply type equal, and you want to click on the number of hires in 2012. So I'm going to click on this cell, and it automatically puts in this GetPivotData. Normally you would think it would just say equal D10, but because we have this on, it's going to say GetPivotData. Now, how does this thing read? You never type these. You always do it by clicking on the cell. So it's looking at the count of ID. That's the column. And this is from the pivot table right here that starts in cell A3. Cool. We are looking at the years. That's this thing, 2012. And what's the value of that year? It was 2012. Now notice that's hard-coded in there. I want to be able to drag this formula down and get the answer for each year. So rather than have a type 2012, I'm just going to delete that and point to the cell that has 2012. And then when I hit enter, I get that answer. And now when I drag that formula down, notice I get 31 for 2013 39 for this one, etc. Now here's the other beauty. Let's say somebody comes along and decides to add sick days to the values. And so these numbers move a little bit or shift up and down. Doesn't affect this GetPivotData formula, right? So if I delete a couple pieces of information, it doesn't affect this formula. One hiccup, if you try to say equal and point to a particular cell in your pivot table and it doesn't work, there is, where did I just go to? One thing that may have to get turned on, you click in your pivot table under Analyze and Options. Whoops, you hit the down arrow on Options. Here's a little check marks next to Generate GetPivotData. So if yours is turned off when you go to hit equal and type, then it does literally just put the cell reference rather than the GetPivotTable formula. So double check that under this option, you have that turned on before you start. And then, as I mentioned, it's used very often in generating reports and having some kind of nice area in your report that's returning information. I would just type equal over here, run to my pivot table, click on that cell, and then hit enter. And then in this case, I'm going to edit this to now point to 2012 so that I can drag the formula down and show the answers for all the other years. So that is it on GetPivotData.